Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, April 18th, 2022. Tonight's topic is myth and metaphor in therapy. And I have to admit, I'm feeling a little bit inadequate for this task. I don't consider myself an expert in mythology. And so part of what I bring to the table is a lens, a way of looking and thinking about our mental health, our life's journey, and our well-being. Like I said on the outset, I don't consider myself an expert in mythology and classic literature, but but part of what I've learned about studying and looking at myth and understanding how it applies to our life's journey is that the real secret is not to understand every archetype, every symbol and what it classically means and what it means in one culture or another, but really to understand our lives. And when you understand our lives, the interpretation of dreams, the interpretation of story becomes self-evident. One of the things that I want to say foremost about tonight is that when you see your life clearly, when you wake up to the construct that you were raised in, the rules, the roles, the patterns, the ideas, the values that you were raised in, and realize that that construct may not have application to today. You might want to break out of that construct. When you have that kind of awakening, when you wake up in therapy, when you do the work that Evoke teaches in attachment theory, you see it everywhere. You recognize it in art, in poetry, in stories, and in movie. Part of what I'm going to be sharing tonight is about modern myth and metaphor. I'm going to be drawing on modern artists, and contemporary movies because they're still being spoken about. Our story, our lives, our humanity is still being spoken about in all of the stories. And of course, I'm going to talk about Joseph Campbell quite a bit in The Hero's Journey, and why it helps to think about and to see and to evaluate our life through the lens of symbols. I love this quote. I've shared it before, shared by the author Laura Sims. She said, when Frances Harwood, anthropologist, asked the Sioux elder why people tell stories, he answered, in order to become human beings. She asked, aren't we human beings already? He smiled, not everyone makes it. Part of what the stories tell us is about our humanity, right? There are heroes and villains in stories, but really what they tell us about is the energies inside of all of us. I shared recently, and there's actually a couple of quotes later on tonight, that our stories, the great stories, they don't make things black and white often. It's not very clear. You see the humanity or the backstory of a particular villain, and you have compassion and empathy and understanding for them. And you also see the flaws of the hero, of the heroine, and you start to realize that there's a lot more gray in life than there is black and white. The culture would have you believe, and Western culture in particular would have you believe that things are very clear cut, that there's a good and a bad, a right and a wrong, and a black and a white. But what our stories teach us about, like this quote illustrates or reveals, is about our humanity. And part of what we want our children, part of our wilderness therapy program and our intensive program teaches and models is to become human, to embrace all the parts of ourselves, even the parts of ourselves that we have been taught or led to believe are bad, that there's some value, there's some redeemable feature in them. I love the quote in the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and the preface where he's talking about what he's going to be talking about. And he says, I can't speak to every concept, to every human virtue. For example, he says, I can't speak to gambling because I have no experience with it, but neither can I speak to the virtue that is associated with gambling because it's not in my personality, it's not in my character. So we start to see integration, we start to see wholeness. Even though our stories split the characters up at times into the good guys and the bad guys, they all represent part of us, and we can see ourselves in all of them. And I think that's what makes a wonderful story is we walk away with more questions about ourselves and our life than we have answers. I wrote this in The Audacity to Be You. Joseph Campbell, a foremost American expert in mythology, explained that the purpose of the heroic journey, illustrated in our myths, is to describe a transformation of consciousness. The kind of change he is talking about is more than any new skill or tool can provide. The shift is fundamental. It's a different way of being. This transformation is even beyond an explanation. It is difficult to put into words or to explain to another person, which is why it is often illustrated through stories or examples. The story, or in Campbell's terms, in Campbell's work, it's the myth, shows us how it will look and sound if we experience the change in ourselves. The lessons from the prophets are vertical, meaning they're teaching us about the depth of life rather than horizontal, referring to the past or the future. The prophets see different levels or layers of life. They don't offer us necessarily a history lesson or a glimpse into the future. They provide us with a deeper meaning to our lives. So part of the stories are, again, going beneath the surface, going beneath the obvious, and to reveal part of the unconscious. I was just listening. In fact, there's a podcast by the Joseph Campbell Foundation called The Podcast with 1,000 Faces, and my therapist Jamie Gill was in the most recent episode. If you want to hear who's taught me virtually everything I know, you can go and listen to that, and just, if you're like me, you'll be inspired by her depth and breadth of knowledge. But part of what she talks about is this idea that even in ancient Greece, that there were different philosophies, that some people looked and accepted the symbols on the surface as the truth. Some of them looked at examples of history or foretelling of the future. But there was a third school of thought that understood and saw them as meaning something about us, about our present day. Words like nirvana, words like heaven and hell, words like God and goddess, in terms of myth, don't refer to the literal entities or the literal definitions that we think about. It's about a way of being, about a transcendence, about overcoming what is before us and being able to see the deeper meaning to our lives. Jamie Gill said in one of her early books, especially with regard to emotional matters, description may not be the most effective route to take here. It may be preferable to evoke the emotion or experience. So part of why teachers use stories, parables, allegories, is because they can draw on something deeper, something that can't simply be explained. I have this experience all the time. Oftentimes when I get asked questions, even on these broadcasts, when I get asked questions by the live audience members or by people who email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com to ask questions, part of the time I'll just respond with a story, because I can't explain to you what to do or tell you the right or the wrong way. But what I can do is I can tell you a story that illustrates a feeling, an idea, a way of being. I think I may have shared just the other night, I recently read a book by Rick Rubin, who's a wonderful artist muse. Artists hire him and bring him in to help unlock their most creative, their deepest potential. Some of the famous artists that many of us know have used him. And he talks about the creative act, the act of art is a way of being. To be an artist, he says, is a way of looking at the world, a way of feeling about the world. And another aspect that stories give us is the large contribution that Sigmund Freud made to psychology. And he gets a lot of criticism, which to me always seems silly, that the pioneer of our field gets criticism for what he didn't know. But the thing that he gave us was the unconscious, the awareness that the thing that's really driving the car, the thing that's steering the ship, the energy that's contributing to our lives, to our dilemmas, is often unconscious material. We think, right, because our conscious mind thinks that it's in control. And with that inflated idea, we we imagine that we've got control over our lives, and that what we see is all that there is. And what stories and artists and poets teach us that there's a vast field or ocean of energies that are in play, and they come out in the art. Oftentimes, artists don't know. What they do have access to is they have less of a barrier to unconsciousness, right? They have a sensitivity where they can express unconscious feelings and ideas. And it's only later, when their art gets interpreted, that we understand its message. And oftentimes, some of the most, I would say, superficial art, or maybe not the deepest art, comes from the conscious mind, right? When a story or a painting or a poem tries too hard to tell the story, oftentimes it doesn't access that deeper well, that deeper emotional field. Joseph Campbell said, "People say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on the purely physical plane will have resonance within that are those of our own innermost being and reality. And so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. That's what it's all finally about. And that's what these clues help us to find within ourselves." So part of what art does, part of what storytelling does, is it touches on a part of ourselves that might not have risen to consciousness. I remember I was telling my wife about this just the other day. Some friends of mine had a band here in Salt Lake City. They've since moved to Nashville and broken up to a large degree. But I was listening to them in the local clubs, going to listen to live music, and I really resonated with their music. And I remember when I was writing the Journey of the Heroic Parent, I wanted to use a quote because they had such a beautiful sensibility. And so I thought to myself, I want to share a quote. I want it to be one of the epigraphs of one of the chapters. And I called the lead singer, the writer, and I asked him for permission. He said, "Of course, sure, you're welcome to do that." And then I sat down and I looked at their lyrics, and I remember I was drawn to this song. I didn't know why. I was writing the chapter on shame, and I was drawn to this song, and I went right to a portion of the song that somehow I knew it was there, but I couldn't remember it consciously. And it ended up being the epigraph of the chapter on shame. And it's where Carl Henderson, the lead singer, writes, he says, I'm sorry for the mess that I've made. And if you can open up your ears, you could hear what I have to say. I could lay it on the table for days. And it was this confession addressing his mother of the shame that he felt. I'm sorry for the mess that I've made. And if you could open up your ears, you could hear what I have to say. I could pour it. I could leave it on the table for days. So I had no conscious memory that nugget was there, but something drew me to it. And that's what art, that's what poetry in this case can do for us. Seeing the meaning in myth, metaphor, and symbol is a way of being. It comes when we look for the meaning of things beyond the surface. It's beyond the conscious mind. Like art and dreams, myths, stories, parables, allegories, and symbols connect with the unconscious and give us a sense of that which is beyond our understanding. And even though we might not at first see the depth of it, right? You have the experience of watching a movie or listening to a song, and then years later, I went to the Broadway show that's playing right now about Neil Diamond. Neil Diamond was my mother's favorite artist growing up. We had those 8-track tapes, and she listened to it constantly. And I knew I liked it. I was exposed to it. I liked the sound of it. And then I went and saw this play called A Beautiful Noise that's playing currently on Broadway, and I could not believe the depth of his music. There's a song where he's talking about his own life, and he's talking about, have you ever heard of a frog that became a prince? You know, the dream of becoming a prince, and then became one. And that was the story of his life, of his success. He talked about the imaginary person Shiloh when he was a child, and how that was the only one that gave him company, and the song Solitary Man. All of that was there. And listening to it 30, 40 years later, at least 40 years later, actually, I was able to connect to it on a much more conscious level. Joseph Campbell, like I mentioned, identified a pattern in stories. And mind you, not every story, not every myth contains every aspect of the hero's journey. He called this the hero's journey. But we can see this template, this algorithm in the stories that we are drawn to. And the most simple way to break this hero's journey apart, to analyze it, is in the 3 stages. The stage of separation, initiation, and return. Right? There's a way of being. There's the way that the culture, the way that the family teaches you that this is the way that we live. These are the rules of society. This is how it's done. And the separation is when we leave that, when we go away from that. Oftentimes that is precipitated by a crisis, right? The world that we have constructed starts to fall apart. The way that we're living our life stops working. It often happens to us in middle age. In fact, a lot of the clients that we work with at Evoke, this separation happens when you have a child that's struggling with mental health or addiction. And all the things that you thought as a parent, because of your background, because of the things that you would learn, that would prevent the crisis that now is upon you, seem to have lost their power, seem to have lost their efficacy. And so there's an incredible, destructive, scary, fearful moment when we leave the known and find ourselves in the unknown. And if you look at Campbell's hero's journey, like I said, he has a lot of smaller stages. Along the way, we find magical helpers. We find teachers. It could be a book or a podcast, right? It could be a therapist. It could be a sponsor in Al-Anon. We find these people that show up in our lives and have some wisdom because they've been on this journey ahead of us. And they've come back, and I'll talk about that as the cycle goes on. And they've come back to share the healing elixir that they've gained on their journey. And they help us along the way. And then we go through the stage of initiation, the stage of really going out and crossing that threshold where we're seeking after the thing. We're seeking after the chalice, the widget, the gold, the treasure. For parents of our program, it is to search after the child who's lost, the child whose life is falling apart, maybe even where their life is being threatened by their own actions, to go after them. And you go to places like this podcast, for those of you that are listening or even watching live. You walk into an Al-Anon meeting. And what you're looking for, symbolically speaking, is you're looking for the solution to the child's dilemma, right? You're searching for the salvation of the child. Maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's your anxiety or your depression. You've lost your job because of your substance abuse or because of your depression, your anxiety, what have you. But you're searching for things to save yourself. And there's this reluctance to leave the known, right? There's this refusal of the call. But you press forward because the thing that you're searching for is something that you must have. I heard one person say it's the thing you cannot not do. You go into the most terrifying places. You enter the cave, the dark forest, the deep ocean, the therapist's office. And things, by the way, along this are scary. They don't make sense. Everything's upside down. I cannot tell you how many times I've had the folks that listen to this podcast, this broadcast, this webinar, and that have read my book saying, I didn't understand for months what you were talking about. And I always tease and joke and say, I don't know why you would continue to listen if it didn't make sense to you. But I think now in tonight's context, it was like the song that I found with that beautiful quote. You're drawn to something. You know there's something different. You're hearing something different. I was listening to a Joseph Campbell quote from his series called The Power of Myth with Bill Moyers. That was recorded in, I believe, the late 1980s. Wonderful series. If you're interested in this stuff, I would encourage you to read The Power of Myth, which is based on that series, or to go, I believe it's on Amazon Prime. You can watch the series with Bill Moyers. I think it's a 6-part episode. If I think I'm right, 5 or 6 episodes. There were, I think he did 5, and then he came back and did the 6th a little bit later. I hope I'm right about that number. At any rate, and he talks about this experience, this one micro step in the hero's journey called the belly of the whale. That there's this symbolic moment of being swallowed by the unconscious, of going down into the water. And confronting the beast, being even consumed by it. But at some point, you face your dragon, you face your darkness, and you assimilate its wisdom and its power. So many things that we've been taught to be afraid of in our lives, the myths tell us that those places and those things hold great wisdom. One of my favorite books, one of the books that made the biggest impact on my life, is about this shadow or this dark side. It's called Meeting the Shadow, and the subtitle is Understanding the Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature. So many things I was told to be afraid of. Feelings, for example, anger, sadness. So many things I was taught by my culture and family to be afraid of also hold great wisdom and great power. So you assimilate the dragon, the power of the beast, those parts of it, and you become a more capable person. Inside of anger, for example, is a drive to take care of yourself. Anger holds the same power as self-care. The resentments and the anger that we feel are often a message from our unconscious that says we're not taking good enough care of ourselves. We've been expecting everybody to take care of us, and they're not doing it, and we're resentful and angry. So we learn to incorporate the positive sides of these shadowy characters, these shadowy experiences. The dragon battle is that final confrontation with the shoulds and the shouldn'ts. I think of therapy in a very large sense about assisting folks with their dragon battle. Because so many of us are held back from our freedom, from our greatest joy, by the shoulds that we carry, the have-tos, the musts. And here's another example. When we started our wilderness therapy program 25 years ago, I made it a tool that in our groups with the young people that we were going to discourage the use of the words good, bad, right, wrong, should, have to, must, ought to, all of those imperative words, we called them. At the time that I made that rule, I had no idea that this, according to mythologists, philosophers, Jungian psychologists, Freudian psychologists, I had no idea at the time that this was the great barrier. That like Nietzsche and Joseph Campbell suggested, that in this metaphorical sense, we have to defeat the dragon of should and should not. Or others have said you have to make friends with the dragon of should and should not. And then what the dragon has been hoarding, right, which I've just been talking about with the example of the belly of the whale, what the dragon has been hoarding, the treasure that it's been hoarding, it gives it to us. And the great irony of my life is that the more that I defeat the should energy and the shouldn't energy, the more I'm available to love. In other words, the more that my ego, that energy inside of me that has to be good and right, the more that I kill that or let that go, the more available I am to love other people, to share with them gifts, to offer compassion and empathy. And our stories teach us that. And then the last stage of the hero's journey is the return. You come back to the community. You come back and to the village and you share with them the lessons of your journey. That's why we sit in circles in Al-Anon, in AA, in Sex and Love Anonymous, in Gambling Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, refuge recovery support groups. We sit in those groups and we come back to share our strength and our hope with others, the lessons from our journey. And we go on this, a successful life, according to Campbell, is going on this hero's journey over and over and over again throughout our lives. So that's the template. I'll read some of the language. Separation includes the call to adventure. The call to adventure is the point in a person's life when they are first given notice that everything is going to change, whether they know it or not. Often when the hero is called, they initially refuse the invitation. Supernatural aid. Once the hero is committed to the quest, consciously or unconsciously, his or her guide and magical helper appears or becomes known. For me, that was my therapist, Jamie Gill. And then the crossing of the first threshold. This is the point where the person actually crosses into the field of adventure, leaving the known limits of his or her world and venturing into the unknown and the dangerous realm where the rules and limits are not known. One of my favorite things that somebody ever said to me was once they had given up a closely held belief of theirs that they'd carried their entire life, they became terrified to realize that now everything was up for grabs. And oftentimes, this is what Brene Brown talks about in her first talk, most famous TED Talk, when she talks about having a crisis, a nervous breakdown, and her therapist called it a spiritual awakening. It's an inevitable stage. Some of you are in it or have been through it where you realize that you feel ungrounded, untethered. You don't know where the guardrails are anymore. It can get a little crazy. It's what a midlife crisis is. It's all of the old rules are out the window and you're starting from scratch. And there's an inevitable lost feeling, lonely feeling in that process. The second stage of the hero's journey, the initiation. The road of trials. The road of trials is a series of tests, tasks, or ordeals that a person must undergo to begin the transformation. Often the person fails one or more of these tests, which often occur in threes. The meeting with the goddess. The meeting with the goddess represents the point in the adventure when the person experiences a love that has a power or significance of the all-powerful, all-encompassing, unconditional love that a fortunate infant may experience with his or her mother. The person begins to see him or herself in a non-dualistic way. This is a very important step in the process and is often represented by the person finding the other person that he or she loves most completely. Again, for me, it was two people, really. It was my therapist and my wife. When I found that those two people, in different ways, slightly different times, were able to love and look at my horrible, rotten self with compassion and non-judgment. I experienced, like it says here, that feeling of non-dualism, that I wasn't bad, I was just hurting, just like your children. It's not evil, it's pain, it's trauma. And yes, hurt people. And one of the ways that we protect ourselves from the vulnerable feelings of sadness and hurt is to project onto hurt people this idea of evil. Because some of the things that hurt people do are very, very harmful to others. But in the context of love, this goddess energy, we recognize that it's not so simple. It's not so binary. And then the return. The dragon battle precedes the return. You have to slay your dragon, or another way to look at it, you have to love and make peace with your dragon. The hero moves beyond the pairs of opposites to a state of divine knowledge, love, compassion, and bliss. The person is in heaven and beyond all strife. A more mundane way of looking at this step is that it is a period of rest, peace, and fulfillment before the hero begins the return. The ultimate boon is the achievement of the goal of the quest. It is what the person went on the journey to get. All the previous steps serve to prepare and purify the person for this step, since in many myths the boon is something transcendent, like the elixir of life itself, or a plant that supplies immortality, or the Holy Grail. This is a beautiful moment. This is a moment when I've been reading The Hero with a Thousand Faces this week, the seminal work of Joseph Campbell. And this is a moment when you're in touch with eternity, when you realize that now is eternity, that now is heaven, that the purpose of life is your life, and that all the pain and the sadness are only evidence that you're still alive. And when you see it through those eyes, it becomes a joyful, peaceful, eternal experience. And this is what's often referred to as nirvana or heaven. That moment in time that some of you have experienced on this journey. Somebody wrote a blog for our webpage a while ago, says that the most wonderful gift was wrapped in the ugliest wrapping paper. This is the hero's journey. Like I said, I'm not an expert on symbols and myth and culture and archetypes, but I understand what it means to look at the world through these kinds of eyes, to hear people's stories through this lens. And so I wanted to share with you some images, those of you that are watching, some images from modern myths that have captured our attention. Superman, I like Superman because it's about this experience of going away from home. And we're away from home, we're out in the world, we can leap tall buildings with a single bound. And the only thing that compromises us, the only thing that brings us to our knees is a piece of home, ironically. That planet that gave us life, the core, the mother, right? You have the experience of going back home and regressing. I was just at the doctor's today for a routine visit, and I was sharing with my wife that experience of sitting with a medical doctor, I wasn't there for a problem. I was there for my routine visit. I regressed to a point where I actually lost the knowledge of some of the concepts that I had psychologically. We were talking about anxiety and depression, and I lost the term, I lost the acronym SSRI, which is the medication most often given for depression and anxiety. I couldn't find it. You go back home for the holidays and you don't act like a 55-year-old professional adult person. You look like a 16-year-old middle child, rebellious and petulant. Rocky, Groundhog Day, The Truman Show, The Matrix is a great hero's journey. Star Wars, of course, based very, very intentionally on Joseph Campbell's work. Frozen, I've talked about that a lot. I just took some movies that have won Best Picture of late. Coda, Nomadland, Iron Man, Lion King, Lord of the Rings, Goonies, The Wizard of Oz, of course, Harry Potter. This last one, Everything Everywhere All at Once, I've been thinking about that a lot this week. When I saw it the first time, I knew it had deeper meaning. But I was so distracted by the special effects, the technology, this idea of the multiverse. If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry to be talking about it, but if you have seen it or even seen clips of it, there's one multiverse, one alternative universe where everything's all the same as it is here, but the difference is that people's fingers are made out of hot dogs. There's another version of a universe where the main characters are successful, very, very wealthy, successful actors, an actress, a martial arts expert, and a business person. And there's all these various alternative universes. But the story does a good job of distracting us because it's just one story. It's just about love and fear and transcendence. It's everything, everywhere, all at once. And if you get distracted by the hot dog fingers, it's like getting distracted by life, the specifics of life. The real message is that we have a couple of simple choices, which is to move forward with life, to feel its pain, its loss, and its love, to experience the sublime in being present in our lives, or to escape, to run away, to self-medicate, to avoid, to defend against that which we find intolerable, to use our hate and our rage and our energy to try to control life, to be something that it's not. So the point of the movie, and it gets very, very simple and concrete toward the end. If you haven't seen it, this is a spoiler alert for you. At the very end, it gets very clear, where the mother turns to her father and she says, I won't keep doing this. I won't keep living according to your values and your rules. This is my daughter. This is her wife. Or, excuse me, this is her girlfriend. And I choose her. And I choose love. In Star Wars, in The Empire Strikes Back, it's the same exact story. When Darth Vader brought Luke to meet the Emperor, and essentially the Emperor, he brought him to the Emperor so that the Emperor could convert him to this philosophy of control and anger, where nobody felt any pain. That was the whole reason that Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, was attracted to the dark side, so that he didn't have to feel the pain of the loss of his wife and his mother earlier in his life. That was the defense against feeling. And you can see in this climactic scene where the Emperor is trying to convert, having this war with Luke, and Luke is resisting with all of his love and all of his heart, willing to die for it. And you can watch it. If you watch it again, you're watching Darth Vader look at the Emperor and then look back at Luke, look at the Emperor and look back at Luke, and then Darth Vader chooses his son. And that's what you're being asked to do right now in this process. Often it is our children and our love for them, the thing that we cannot not do, the thing that would pull us into oncoming traffic, into a lion's den, into the most terrifying place in the world, a therapist's office. It's that love that is the only thing that could drive us, motivate us to leave behind the known, the rules and the roles, the expectations, the values, the constructs of our childhood. And of course, in Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, this actually physically kills Darth Vader. He dies as a result of his injuries. But really, he's saved. And that's a metaphor for giving up the old life. As Joseph Campbell says, we must be willing to let go of the life that we are living so as to be available to the life that is waiting for us. That's the motif. That's what the stories are trying to teach us. Over and over again, the hero, the heroine goes after the thing, which they often don't get, the thing. But what they get is an experience of heaven here on earth, of connecting with eternity, which is love and joy and peace. And now, I'm not going to read all of these songs, because every time you read a song, I don't know if you have this experience, but you hear yourself sort of starting to sing it. But I just wanted to share with you a few songs. This is by the Beatles. It's called She's Leaving Home. And I'll read to you a few lines where the parents wake up and their daughter's gone. And the lines in the middle of the song go like this: picks up the letter that's lying there. Standing alone at the top of the stairs, she breaks down and cries to her husband, "Daddy, our baby's gone. Why would she treat us so thoughtlessly? How could she do this to me?" She, and then there's a harmony that sings, "We never thought of ourselves," is leaving. Never a thought for ourselves. Home. We struggled hard all of our lives to get by. She's leaving home after living alone for so many years. How many of you have experienced that? Literally experienced that. Those feelings, those thoughts. I love this song. This song is called "I Am Mine," performed by Pearl Jam, written by Eddie Vedder. It happened soon after Pearl Jam was part of a music festival. I believe it was in Germany. I think it was Germany. It was in Europe for sure. And at the music festival, some fans were trampled to death, and it shook the band. And Eddie took some time off. He shares all of this in his recent book by the same title as the song, "I Am Mine." He took some time off, and every one of them considered quitting the band, never performing music live or in the studio again. Eddie went to Spain, he said, to study the Spanish guitar by himself. And he talks about this experience. "I know that I was born, and I know that I'll die, and the in-between is mine. I am mine." There is a point in our lives, often in midlife, where we take back our lives. All the shoulds, the have to, I'm being forced to. We decide enough is enough. We decide that nobody's going to tell us. And it can look, sometimes in dark and scary moments, it can look extraordinarily selfish. It can look very uncaring of everybody around the person, for sure. It does. But oftentimes, if the heroine or the hero keeps going, they find balance. They find a life where they carve out that is both theirs and also available to love. One of my very favorite songs of all time is written by David Gilmour and Roger Waters from Pink Floyd. I am going to read all of this because I think it's a great series of questions about the hero's journey, about our lives. And they wrote, "So you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain? Can you tell a green field from a cold steel rail, a smile from a veil? Do you think you can tell? Did they get you to trade your heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, hot air for a cool breeze, cold comfort for change? Did you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a leading role in a cage? How I wish you were here. We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl year after year, running over the same old ground. What have we found? The same old fears. Wish you were here." This to me speaks to this idea about that crossing of the threshold of separation. Are you ready to see what's right in front of you? Are you ready to walk on in the war, to accept a walk-on part in the war instead of a leading role in a cage? That is the story of the hero's journey. Are you going to stay in the old contexts? Are you going to stay with the approval of the culture, the people that raised you? Or are you going to walk out there and confront it? It's the same story over and over and over again. I shared this song in my book. Part of the song in the book, the Audacity to Be You, ends with this. It's called Walt Grace's Submarine Ride, 1967. I think is the full title. I'm pretty close, by John Mayer. Listen to how much of the hero's journey is in this story. I'll read it to you. Walt Grace, desperately aiding his whole place, dreamed to discover a new space and buried himself alive. Inside his basement, tongue on the side of his basement. Oh, sorry about my dog barking there. Inside his basement, tongue on the side of his face meant he's working away on displacement and what it would take to survive. This character decides that he's going to build a submarine, a homemade submarine, using parts from his garage, and he's going to sail to Japan. In the chorus, it says, "Because when you're done with this world, you know the next is up to you." His wife told his kids he was crazy. His friends said he'd fail if he'd try. That's the dragon battle. Everybody tells you not to do it. They tell you you're crazy. But with a will to work hard and a library card, he took a homemade fan blade one-man submarine ride. And it goes on. Because when you're done with this world, you know the next is up to you. It is the hero's journey. And of course, we can look to classic mythology. I love the story of Midas. The Greeks tell of King Midas, who had the luck to win from the Bacchus the offer of whatsoever boon he might desire. He asked that everything he touched should be turned into gold. This is about thinking that the value of life is in its material value, its objective value. When he went his way, he plucked experimentally the twig of an oak tree, and it was immediately turned into gold. He took up a stone, it had turned into gold. An apple was a golden nugget in his hand. Ecstatic, he prepared a magnificent feast to celebrate the miracle. But when he sat down and set his fingers to the roast, it was transmuted. At his lips, the wine became liquid gold. And when his little daughter, whom he loved beyond anything on earth, came to console him in his misery, she became, the moment he embraced her, a pretty golden statue. This tells the story of how the real value in the things in our life are our relationship to it, not in its objective value, right? You've heard of the phrase objectification, the way that something looks or how much money it can make us. If our children are going to be doctors or lawyers or successful or go to Harvard versus the relationship that we have with them. I've shared that this myth taught me and reminded me, especially with my youngest child, that I was going to have a different relationship with her and her high school career than the rest of my children. And that I wasn't going to let my focus on academics and formal education ruin the relationship with her like it had to some degree with some of my other children, that it had to some degree with my own childhood and my own parents. It's a different kind of relationship. I love the story of Aphrodite and Psyche. It offers some insight into how we deal with a formidable antagonist. Aphrodite, angry that Psyche completed the first task required to earn back Aphrodite's son Eros, sends Psyche on another dangerous and seemingly impossible mission. She is to gather the fleece from the golden rams. Psyche finds the golden rams grazing near a river and realizes they pose a mortal threat. This is because their golden wool under the heat of the day makes the rams dangerously hot to touch. Faced with such an impossible task, Psyche decides she is going to kill herself by throwing herself into the river. But the river reeds stop her and offer her some advice. They tell her that if she gathers the fleece from the rams during the day under the hot sun, she will surely burn. But if she waits till the sun sets and gathers fleece left on the thicket where the rams have been, she will live. With that, she'll be able to gather enough of the golden fleece to satisfy Aphrodite with no cost to the rams or herself. What's the lesson here? The rams are a symbol of masculine energy and aggression. It's trying to control things, meeting force with force. Meeting anger with anger would be like going to gather the fleece during the day under the hot sun. Very little would be solved, and both parties are likely to suffer. Waiting for it to cool and for the sun to go down means going around the anger instead of facing it head on. I was just sharing with a client recently, you have to lose the battle to win the war. I was being asked, what do you do in a certain moment with a child when you're in this escalating power struggle? And my thought is, you lose. You let them win. You wait till the sun goes down. And the next day when the iron is cold, strike while the iron is cold, you go and have a discussion. And losing enough battles, you can make headway. Waiting for it to cool and for the sun to go down means going around the anger instead of facing it head on. The story dates back to the 2nd century AD. In some ways, we have not learned much in the last couple thousand years. J.D. Gill writes, the point is you cannot confront power head on, or you will be destroyed by it. Power need not be confronted. In fact, it is typically stupid to do so. The reeds whisper vegetative wisdom. Wait, be patient. Things changed. This is the wisdom for growth. This is a message from thousands of years ago about how to deal with our children. And our children are headstrong and stubborn and willful. And in the end of the day, most of them are going to be more powerful than we ever were in terms of their spiritual and psychological depth and awareness. And this myth invites us to slow down, to check our ego, to let go of control, to learn to lose, to learn to surrender. I wrote this a couple of weeks ago, and then I found the quote next to it just yesterday. I wrote, in myths or stories, the idea is not to identify solely with the princess, hero, villain, etc. The message in these stories is that you are all the characters. The objective is to integrate and relate to all the parts of the self. And then I read this quote just yesterday from Thich Nhat Hanh, had never seen it before, and this is what he wrote. Continue practicing until you see yourself in the most cruel and inhumane political leader, in the most devastatingly tortured prisoner, in the wealthiest man, and in this child starving, all skin and bones. Practice until you recognize your presence in everyone else, on the bus, in the subway, in the concentration camp, working in the fields, in a leaf, in a caterpillar, in a dewdrop, in a ray of sunshine. Meditate until you see yourself in a speck of dust and in the most distant galaxy. It sounds very poetic and mythological and maybe even a little bit too far out there, but it is an awareness of our connection to everything. Like the philosopher Charles Eisenstein said in his book, The More Beautiful World That We Know Is Possible, the reason that it hurts our hearts when we hear about the Great Barrier Reef being destroyed is because it's happening to us. We are connected to it. When we hear about starving children in countries we've never visited, or about a young black teenager just yesterday who was shot because he knocked on the wrong door, it hurts us because it is us. We are connected to it. We're a part of it. Very practically, a dream is a personal myth. And a myth that endures is understood to represent the themes of a moment in time, a culture, the collective unconscious. If enough people have similar dreams, they represent a certain kind of message or energy in the zeitgeist of the culture. Myths tie us to something bigger than ourselves. They help offer our lives and our suffering meaning. They connect us to others and help us realize that we're not the first ones or the only ones who have gone through something. Using myths and stories go around resistance. Because if there's resistance, we can identify with the myth, with the story, and keep it distant from us if we're not ready to hear it at its most profound levels. In other words, the myth, the story, the parable, it meets us where we're at. We can meet it at the most superficial and concrete level, or we can let it sink into our souls and understand ourselves at a deeper level. Part of myths and stories are to embrace not knowing. to embrace the unknowable. I think a lot of people gravitate toward myths for answers, for dogma, for a reduction in anxiety by offering us certainty. Whereas clinically speaking, therapeutically speaking, spiritually speaking, mythologically speaking, the idea is to give us a sense of wonder and awe at what we can't possibly understand or know. And of course, they're not literal, but they're meant to speak to the fundamental patterns and energies of life. I wrote this just today when I was working on this presentation. We can learn on a very practical, simple level to listen to our children like they are telling us their dreams. Listening to a child's lies or exaggerations tells us something they cannot express or something they cannot access. I explained to parents that our work together gives them new eyes and new ears with which to see and hear their children. With this new information, we do not strip the child of their dignity, removing their armor and expose them beyond what they are able to handle, but we learn to see them more clearly. And operating with this new awareness, we are better positioned to parent them and to respond to their needs with empathy. In mythology, Marie-Louise von Franz said, in mythology, and this is just one of a limited number of examples, in mythology, tears are often supposed to have a redeeming and healing effect. If you've ever dealt with people who have become petrified by suffering, you know how redeeming it is if they can cry. At the end of The Knight in Rusty Armor, the last page, he says, I nearly died from all the tears I left unshed. Like I said, if you want to learn more about this, you can watch the movie Finding Joe, read the book The Power of Myth, or watch the series with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers called The Power of Myth. A wonderful allegory of the hero's journey is The Knight in Rusty Armor. It's one of the 2 books that is part of the required reading of our program. So for take home, you're on your own journey. Your children and their troubles are the call to adventure. You're reluctant to answer the call. Quote, it's psychobabble, or let's fix this kid and get back to life, get back on track, the way things should be, supposed to be, normal life. You have to enter into the forest as the knights of King Arthur, each following their own path into the forest. You can't follow somebody. I can't tell you what to do. It's not a technique when I tell you that I can't give you advice on what to do in your life. It's not a technique. Jung says if the path before you is clear, it's somebody else's path. It's going to be scary. It's going to be, you're going to have to close your eyes and step into it. The motif of death in mythology is that something must die in order for a new part of us to emerge. I think I shared with you at one point when I was going through one of my midlife crises, one of my profound hero's journeys, a colleague and friend who had obviously been where I had been, who was several years my senior, gave me a book on the masculine midlife crisis. It was called Death of a Hero, Birth of the Soul. And that's really what my work was, is I'm no longer the good one. I am no longer the champion. I'm no longer on top. But I'm trying to find out who I am. You'll meet helpers. You'll become a master of 2 worlds. And in the end, you'll find your story. And when you do, I hope you share it with others. Come back to the community, come back to those who are willing to listen and offer them comfort. Share with them your story, which is the elixir. Your story is the balm. Your life is the balm. Your journey is the elixir. All right, folks, we're out of time, so I'll save questions for next time. You can get your cameras on your phones ready and point it toward the QR code if you want to go to any of the respective web pages. My 2 books, The Journey of The Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a guided journey into this deeper water, to touch on the unconscious, the inner child, the part of you that is asking to be seen and attended to, the next offering is May 17th through 21st. We call it Finding You. May 19th through 21st is an online offering. It's 3 days, half the time, about a third of the price, and you don't have to travel. We also have Returning to You for those who have been through Finding You. October 11th is that offering, and we have a weekend in the UK this summer, a Finding You weekend, June 23rd through 25th. I don't know if there's a spot left, but you can reach out to intensives@evoketherapy.com. We also have custom intensives for families called Finding Family, and custom intensives for couples called Finding Connection. We have support groups for all of our current and alumni wilderness families. April 20th, 6:30 p.m. is the next offering for that. For alumni only on April 25th at 6:30 p.m., you can attend that. And then we also have an intensive support group. The next offering for that, we have one a month, is May 9th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact Sarah D at evoketherapy.com or visit evoketherapy.com/family involvement for more information. If you want a coach who can help you on your journey, we have coaches that are available for individuals, for couples, for families. If your child is returning home, transitioning home, they can be helpful for that. They can be helpful and on any part of your journey. They can do it virtually. We have well over 40 coaches to choose from, so we can match you up with one that works. Contact coaching@evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, just to try 6. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, AdultChildren.org, or RefugeRecovery.org. You can also go to NAMI.org, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, to find free classes and resources in your area. All these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer and search for Finding You there. You can also go to Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the rebroadcast presentations with the video and the slides. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And you can find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And also we have an Evoke blog that is wonderfully curated and contributed to by all of our staff and therapists. If you want to get back to help people that can't afford therapy, we would encourage you to contact one of our 3 charitable partners, choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, or evokefamilyfoundation.org. And you can earmark your donation to go toward a specific population, a specific profile, or a specific program. My next broadcast will be in 2 days at 6:30 p.m. That's where I'll take any leftover questions from tonight, or any questions that you want to write to webinar@evoketherapy.com at any time. We'll go toward the next Q&A, the next open forum for Evoke families and friends. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it touched you in some way and gave you some glimpse into how myths and stories and metaphors and symbols and poetry and art can fit into our psychological and spiritual lives. For and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for coming to this broadcast, and thank you for being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in about 48 hours. Take care. Bye-bye.